Hey guys, this is Alex Serpentine, back again with a new video in my new series on my Alex Serpentine Podcast. This is my first podcast episode where I'm interviewing somebody, and today it's Shepherd Hoodwin. How's it going, Shepherd?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, thanks for joining. I'm going to introduce you real quick to everybody. Here's a little bio. Shepherd Hoodwin is Laguna Niguel. You live in Laguna Niguel, California. You're a channel who specializes in the fascinating Michael teachings about how we set up our lifetimes. You've been a channel since 1986. You do intuitive readings, mediumship, past life regression, healing, counseling, and channeling coaching. And you've conducted workshops on Michael teachings throughout the U.S. and other places in the world too. One of your main books is Journey of Your Soul, one of the Michael teachings books, and you have some other books too that I've really enjoyed reading, like The Compassion for Evil. That was a really interesting one. Energy Literacy, All His Choice. And you have this one I haven't read yet, but I'm excited to read at some point, The Enlightenment for Nitwits. That's pretty cool. That's a sagey thing.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, and we're going to probably ask you some questions about enlightenment a little bit later too. But yeah, so I just wanted to have you on my channel and talk about some of the main things about Michael teachings, since on my channel I've been making videos on Michael teachings. And I've also ordered a lot of charts from you, from celebrities and people in my family and friends. And I've loved getting those charts. Have been so helpful to have that information. So thank you so much.
You are most welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah. So first, I want to just get into what Michael teachings is. So I was wondering if you can do your quick intro on what you would say when people ask you what is Michael teachings and what it's about and why is it important.
The Michael teachings are a channeled body of material about how we as souls set up our lifetimes, why we are the way we are, what we're doing here, the big questions of life, but also what goes into our makeup. And why is it important? Well, it's really fascinating and it's really useful because it helps us understand ourselves and others a whole lot better.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's really interesting. There's like several different aspects of it that I've highlighted for myself that were really helpful. The roles are really interesting as archetypes to understand ourselves, having there's 7 primary archetypes, and that once you like understand them, like it kind of changes your whole understanding of everybody. Like you can start seeing the archetypes in other people, like, oh, that's a very sagey person. That person's a scholar. You can see that really strongly. And another one that's been, the other 2 that have been really helpful are actually 3, are the soul ages, understanding where we're coming from in our perspective based on the soul ages. And the goal has been really interesting. For me, like understanding my goal of dominance is really, really helpful and how that works in my life. And seeing that for other people, what their goals are and the themes that play out in their life has been really helpful. And the obstacles also I see is like really important and helpful information to know, because like if you can overcome your obstacles, like it can like transform your life so much. So yeah, those are some really big things that I would see that are really helpful, but the charts are so helpful to know all that information. So you do this channeling for Michael teachings, right? So tell me a little bit about that and what channeling is.
Channeling is something that people have done in virtually every society, going back to the most primitive times. It's going into an altered state and connecting with intelligence that's not currently in physical human form. And it's a way of getting higher guidance, wisdom, understanding. I think maybe people might more commonly understand it in the context of the shamanistic traditions, where the shaman would go into trance to contact spirits and such. And then there's just more mundane applications of it. People who say they were inspired, for example, artists or poets, sometimes they'll tell you, I didn't write this, it just flowed through me. They were connecting with something that was not purely from their local self. It may have involved their own creativity, but it could have also been collaborative with those who are not currently in physical form. So this sort of thing goes on all the time. It's very common in various permutations. In official channeling, one such as me opens to allow another being, in this case, the Michael group, to come into my body or into my energy field and dictate information that I could not have gotten on my own. Now, the Michael charts that you're talking about are profiles that profile an individual person, both on the level of soul and personality. Will you be able to show some examples of charts, maybe splice them into the video when you're editing so people can see what we're talking about?
Yeah, I could. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting to do. I was thinking, how about I show like Carl Jung? That would be an
Sure.
interesting one.
Sure, yes, that would be great, so people will know what we're referring to. Basically, the Michael charts that I do, there are a number of Michael channels. I'm not the only one, and they each do their own thing a little differently. Have about 25 pieces of information about them, and they are traits of the soul and traits of the personality, and all of these things we chose either before incarnating, or some of them are more improvised during the lifetime. And understanding these traits and energies that we chose according to what we wanted to get done in that lifetime really helps us understand the forces that shape us, why we are the way we are, and just as important, why we aren't the way we aren't, and that it's all okay, and why other people are the way they are. Many of these traits have positive and negative poles, meaning that of themselves they're neutral, but if we do them in a positive way with love, then they're a beautiful thing. And if they're distorted by fear, insecurity, ignorance, and so forth, then they become something destructive. So, one of the purposes of knowing your own Michael chart is to have words that identify, oh, this is where I'm going into my negative, and this is what it is like to be in the positive. And if we get a better feel for what those two things feel like, we can steer the ship of our lives more skillfully and be more in the positive and therefore be happier.
Awesome. Yeah, there's so much detail to look at when the chart. What you're saying is looking at the positive side, being in the positive pole versus the negative pole, because you can get like some general ideas from looking at the chart, but there's different ways it can express itself based on how somebody's actually coming at, actually manifesting these things. Yeah, let's show the Carl Jung chart. I have it right here. Let me see if I can get that going here. This is a chart I got from you recently. The showing, yeah.
Oh, and you put it in a different format. That's cool.
Yeah, so this is the format I use when I show charts on my channel and stuff. It's like a color coded version. So the S and stuff is on the left, and the overleaves are on the right. And see if I can make this zoomed in a little bit. Tell me if this looks better. Does it take up more? Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So yeah, this is Carl Jung's chart. It was interesting to find out that he is a sage. You see in the essence here. He's got a warrior essence twin, and he's got some skull and server in his casting. He's an old soul sage, old level 5, manifesting level 3. There's a note that he has 93 past lives. Sometimes you include that, but rarely, right? When you get a chart channeled.
Yeah, I did it at the beginning, and I discontinued that because it raised more questions than it answered, and it really isn't the Michael teachings. But it sometimes people request it, so I'll add it in.
Yeah,
it's not really that meaningful. And
Yeah, it can vary, right, for each person how many somebody will have.
yes, yeah, and I should mention here too that with the celebrity, we call these the overleaves, the chart as a whole, the various traits are sometimes controversial. So different channels might get something different on them, and I
Yeah.
believe that usually the first access through a channel who's generally accurate at such things tends to be the most accurate. But one thing that the Michael teachings emphasizes over and over is to validate, which is to study it. And don't just take someone's word for anything in
Yeah.
life, but think about it and study the facts and be more scientific about proving or disproving whether it is valid in your mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. So another thing that was really interesting about the Carl Jung's chart was this down here. Can you see that? The global job, community responsibility.
Yes.
Because they're saying for him that some people thought he was a priest. They're saying like he seems to have some kind of priest element somewhere. And then when you got his chart channeled, and we saw like he's got some sage and warrior scholar server. There's no priest there, and it's like, why is that? And then you channeled his raw number, which calculates what his global job and community responsibility are, and that's all priest, which is super
Yes.
interesting.
Yes. Yes. So the raw number is relatively recent addition to my charts, but it's something that a channel named JP Van Hull has been giving out for quite some time. So you get a number generally between 1 and 1029, and then you can look it up on a chart, and it will tell you for your specific number what something called your uh, community responsibility and global job are. And also, we can translate that into something called the path of the soul. So it gives you a lot of information. And what it indicates is that when your soul family was planning on coming to the physical plane, it divvied up jobs, and people decided, well, this is something that I want to particularly specialize in. So, with Carl Jung, he chose a particular community jobs and responsibilities, and that resonated with the role of priest. And so, priest is inspirational. So, this is the one place on his chart where you get some strong priest influences. But I believe he's a sage because the emphasis on intellectual insight and also the sort of the twinkle in his eye, the smirk, that sort of thing that is characteristic of the sage in my experience. I have kind of a similar story, Alex, in that people for years were saying that uh, I must have some priest in my chart, and I didn't have a bit of it until JP channeled my raw number, and it was the same story as Jung. My number's reduced to 661. One is server and 6 is priest. So that's where it came from in me too.
Yeah, so you have trust faith as your community responsibility, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I actually have my global job is salvage salvation. So we both have this tied to like what Carl Jung's got in his global job and community responsibilities, is the double priest global job or community responsibility. And I can totally relate to what you're saying because before I knew much about Michael teachings, I thought I was a priest for some reason. And I think that's because of my global job. But in my chart, I'm a scholar with some extra scholar stuff, sage essence twin, artisan casting, and there's no priest there. But I can really relate to the priest energy with my global job. So it's an interesting extra information to have that can color things a little bit differently in your understanding that you won't really be able to find out if it's not channeled. Like it's the special information you get through getting a channeled chart. So yeah, that's really really interesting stuff. I actually wanted to show what we have about Trump because people are going to be curious about that too. That's cool with you. Let me see. If I go like this, stop screen sharing, and then I'll go to his. So this is what we have on Trump. Can you see all this on the screen? Yeah. So this is going to be our new president once again. He's a king. it's been channeled that he has a scholar essence twin, and then his cadence position, cadence or king and warrior, young soul, uh, dominance goal. They say he's got pragmatist attitude and aggression mode. Stubbornness is one of the things that seems to be applies to him pretty well. I heard sliding to arrogance was what he's probably doing, and he has some greed there. Um, so yeah, one question I had for you was seeing that in our country that we're electing another, Trump again, who's clearly following the young soul paradigm. I'm curious to hear what you think about what that says about our country currently, where we're at, because it seems like we're still kind of in this young soul paradigm overall. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think we're in a time of tremendous change, and a lot of people are terrified about moving forward. So often there is a big step backward before moving forward, people holding on to the old for dear life. And then maybe they take that to its ultimate extreme until they can let it go and move forward. So I think human progress is often two steps forward and one back. And things are changing really, really fast, and it does terrify people. Most people really don't love change, and they tend to romanticize the past more than they actually enjoyed it at the time. So
Yeah, that's true, because we had Obama for a while. He was mature, right?
yes, mhm.
Yeah, and I
Level
think I think Joe Biden was also mature. Is that right?
I'll look in my database. I don't recall
Oh
offhand.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, one of the questions I had for you was about the mature soul age, because it seems like uh, from what I remember, it's like 24% of the population overall on the planet is actually immature, and I think it was like 32% or something are young. So there's like a good section of our population that is already in the mature soul age, but it's just
Oh, yeah.
not the overarching paradigm that we're living in currently. So it's like if you're in the mature soul age, um, you might feel out of place in this world that's all young soul age values. Um, so yeah, I was gonna ask you, yeah, what are some things about the mature soul age, that some things we can know about what the mature soul age is like, and how you can see that playing out in the world, and what people are like who are in the mature soul age.
Like so many things on the Michael chart, there are 7 different soul ages. Only 5 of them, though, tend to be done on the physical plane by humans, infant, baby, young, mature, and old. And then the other 2 tend to be more on the higher planes. And what the soul age tells us is what our lessons are about, because we do go through developmental phases, just as we do as individual humans. There are plenty of psychology books out there about how we each go through different life stages and deal with different sort of lessons. So it's the same with the soul. And none of them are good or bad all by themselves. Like most other things on the chart, they have a positive side and a negative side. So when the soul is brand new to a planet, it is what we call infant soul, where it's focused on survival. And these first lifetimes can be actually quite idyllic, like the Garden of Eden,
Mm.
because the soul is deliberately planning to keep it simple and comfortable so that the soul can get acclimated to the climate. And then as it gets more comfortable, it might start to get bored with peace all the time and starts to make karma, like rocking the boat a little bit. And eventually moves into what we call the baby soul cycle, which is focused on structure. And that's where the soul is interested in creating simple societies and learning to live by rules. And so it's a step forward. The negative side of that is being overly rigid about, this is right and wrong, and this is good and bad, and this is where fundamentalism can take hold more, whereas infant souls are pretty much just letting it all hang out. And as that moves along, then we move into the young soul cycle. And I think in spiritual circles, people might dismiss someone who they called a young soul. They might just say, "Oh, they're a young soul. That means they're not very evolved or whatever." But that's not really what that means in the Michael teachings. Young souls in the Michael teachings means that their lessons are about learning how to deal with the outer world, to shape it, to be successful in it. So it does tend to be less introspective, but that doesn't mean that no young souls are introspective. Some of them are. Some of them seek insight if they're a sage, or the higher ideal if they're a priest or whatever. But there's still the sense of what I really need to do. Bottom line is, I need to learn how to be here, how to take advantage of the resources of the world so that I can be effective in it. So when you take that to its zenith, the young soul may become rich and famous, but may just be, the president of their temple, or their PTA or whatever, just to have those lessons, those practice in effectiveness. So it's not a bad thing to be a young soul, but there's the negative side to that. The negative appearance of the young soul is excessive greed, kind of, you know, kicking people out of the way so that they can come to the front of the line. Then there are young souls who are perfectly lovely. So you have Donald Trump, who has some deep problems and is a lot in his negative poles, what we call false personality. But then you had John Kennedy, who was also a young soul king, who was a very lovely, good, generous, kind, thoughtful, idealistic man. So it can go either way in that regard. But you're talking about moving from the average soul age being young to the average soul age being mature. This is a general trend of the times that we live in, that we're in this sort of bumpy, radical change, where we're going from where the average person on earth is young, meaning they're more outwardly focused, they're more materialistic, they're trying to achieve things, which is, again, not a bad thing in and of itself, to where the soul is becoming more interested in introspection, the inner world, their relationships, getting to know themselves, the arts and humanities, building community, and that sort of thing. And this kind of transition can take 100 years, hundreds of years to take place. And you always have some of the younger souls resisting it, and some of the older souls who are quite eager for it. And there can be conflict based on that. Now, the mature soul cycle is inexorably going to be more and more dominant. But again, it takes time. One of Michael's mottos is all is choice. So every human being gets to choose their consciousness. They get to choose what they're going to focus on. They get to choose how they express themselves. So there's no one putting a gun to any soul saying, hey, you need to grow up and start acting like an older soul. That will be their choice. And some choose to resist, and some welcome the evolution. But you do find, if you just review what's been happening over the last several decades, more and more emphasis on personal growth, evolution, self knowledge. I think Oprah is a great example of that. You saw her evolution, because when she started her talk show, it was more sensationalistic, more about getting ratings. And finally, she said, I don't want to do this anymore. I really want to do something meaningful. And she started exploring the real human experience. She brought a lot of light to things like sexual abuse and child abuse and many things. And because of her and many people like her, things that used to be in the shadows are now coming out into the light. And we're realizing that this is ugly. And these are more of the abuses or the negative sides of the younger soul cycles. And we don't want to do this anymore. So, more and more, if you look at what's on the bestseller list, you see a lot of books these days that you would not have seen 50 years ago, about self-realization and about understanding how to heal and trauma and all sorts of things. People just weren't talking about those things when I was a kid. And it's very, very helpful for people.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I've kind of noticed that too. Like as I was growing up, like especially like even in my family, how it seems out in the world, it's like there's more of a spiritual like openness to spirituality in a general sense compared to even like 20, 30 years ago. There's definitely a difference there. I was curious about like what regions would are examples of this, um like in the world. Are there certain countries or like cities or states that represent the mature soul age?
Yes, many of the Northern European countries are older souled, and even Mexico. I think Americans look down their nose at Mexico and they see the corruption and the chaos and all of that. But if you actually observe typical Mexican families, they're very warm and family oriented and community oriented. And uh, so having an average soul age doesn't mean that you become more effective in the way you run your government or whatever. There's also history to take into account, and the poverty and all sorts of situations. In Mexico's case, there's a strong influence from Catholicism and so forth. So nothing is really cut and dried, but you do see a lot of there's just not as ambitious, because the typical young soul, tends to be more ambitious, trying to climb to the top. And in if you're in Mexico and you say, okay, let's get together at 6, people amble in whenever they feel like it. It could be 8 or 10. So it's a more casual, comfortable in your skin. Let's have fun. Let's love each other. That sort of thing.
Mhm.
So it's a more mature soul consciousness in that country, and a lot of countries like that. In the meantime, you find a lot of the Asian countries that were kind of sleepy and not doing very much coming more into the young soul cycle, and suddenly they're really industrializing, like China. Look at how far they've come in terms of factories, and maybe didn't really care so much about all the pollution, although I think they're starting to address that now. But they really wanted to be more successful in the outer world. And that shows the average soul age there moving from baby to young. So that these types of trends happen all over the world, but you can't generalize too much, because everywhere you go, there are people of all soul ages and they march to their own drummers.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was also noticing about the mature soul age, from my own experience, because I'm actually mature level 3. Um, it's pretty intense, right?
Yeah.
Like you go through some like really intense emotional or like psychological, spiritual like lessons during that time, and I think it's because you're going from the young soul age being all outward thrusting, out into the world, and then now it's like you're turning inwards, and you have to like kind of heal from the past and what you've been focusing on. It seems like what's happened is like we've kind of built in terms of the earlier soul ages some kind of structure and limitations on ourselves, that need to be healed in certain levels so you can open up to the deeper inner world and the spiritual dimension, so you can heal from all that and integrate into on a deeper level. um, yeah, tell me a little bit about that and that aspect of the mature soul age.
So there are 7 levels of each of the 5 soul ages that I already talked about. So you start out at first level infant, or what I like to say is survival focused, and you may have 1 lifetime there, or 3 or 5 or 10, however many you choose. And then you go to the second level, and each of these levels are at a different level of commitment to the lessons of that soul age in a different aspect of it. So when you're first level mature, for example, you still are carrying over a lot of the young soul focus. So you're just kind of dipping your toe in the water, as J.P. Van Hall described it. And then at second level, you're half in and half out. Like she uses the analogy of going to the beach. So second level is like you're half in. So you're kind of weighing the lessons of the young soul cycle, which you probably got a pretty good handle on. with the new ones of the mature cycle, and you're trying to balance those two things. When you're third level, it's like jumping in the water and getting totally wet. You're totally submerged in the mature soul perspective, but you haven't quite internalized it yet. You haven't quite gotten totally comfortable there. And each of the numbers in the Michael teachings, 1 through 7, correlate with each of the 7 roles, which are the 7 archetypes or the soul types that we were talking about. So 3 is the warrior level, and warriors work hard. So when you're at the third level of a soul age, you're working hard to internalize, to get the lessons of that soul age. And it can be rather rocky. You're really processing a lot. It's not as comfortable, so you're not as outgoing with what you've learned. It's more the internal churning to help you really get those lessons. So in the Michael teachings, we say that third level mature can be the second most difficult of the 35 soul age levels, because there's 7 times 5 is 35.
Mhm.
But it depends on the individual. Some souls have handled their previous lessons better, and so it's not so hard when they get to some of these more tying up loose ends levels or dealing with new things. You, as a scholar soul, have spent all your lifetimes assimilating. So you like to study, you like to learn. And sometimes that can mean that you have been at arm's length from life. You've been sort of off to the side, taking notes, studying, recording, but sometimes living more vicariously and not actually being immersed in the experience. So when you get into the mature cycle, you are called to jump in with both feet and really experience and really be part of the world, and not just the observer of the world theorizing about it. And so that can be a new experience for the scholar, and that can be rather uncomfortable. It can be a sort of an upheaval for it.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, something interesting about that though is what I've noticed. I've heard about this for the scholar is that they tend to like ruminate on things and get really deep. Like when they're studying something, they're really interested in a certain thing. They'll like get really in depth with it and like kind of hold on to the energy of it. And that's really been a big part of my experience. I think in terms of my healing for this mature soul age stage that I'm in, I've had a lot of like heavy emotional energy from like past lives. It seems like because I have these like kind of stories and heavy emotions inside that didn't have any context inside of my current life, but they had such emotional potency that they were affecting me in this life, and I had to do like a soul retrieval to like clear that out. And I noticed that with other scholars, like what they say is like I've heard that somewhere say that a scholar will take on a drug addiction just to get to know and experience the whole experience of being addicted to a drug, just so they can gather the experience. Um, but yeah, so it's really interesting during the mature soul age for scholars, because that's actually also aligned with when they're at their most balanced, right? And and since it's the fourth soul age, and scholars the fourth role.
Yes,
There's
yes.
something special about that, right? So I'm really curious what you have to say about that, because that's what my current experience is being a scholar in the mature soul age. I feel like I'm at a good balance point, even though it feels kind of difficult to like. I feel like kind of awkward sometimes in social settings, like not knowing how to connect really. But as I'm getting more into it, like I really like the emotional experience is so deep and intense, you know. And I'm wondering, but I think that also makes me more balanced in a way to have this relation to my emotions, where I would typically, as a scholar, have some distance from that. And so at this point, I'm like really going deep into that experience. So I'm curious what you have to say about like scholars embracing the mature soul age and what that's like for them.
I mentioned earlier that each of the numbers 1 through 7 correlate with the roles 1 through 7. And so when you have a number 1, it correlates with the role we call server, which is one of the inspiration axis roles. And whenever you see something in the first position out of 7, it correlates with that. So what Alex, you're talking about here is that scholar is the number 4 position role, and mature is the number 4 position soul age. And so there's a resonance, just like if you go down through your chart, all the overleaves that are in the number 4 position are natural overleaves for the scholar. And so there's always this correlation or this resonance that gives a lot of insight into how those things work. So the most stereotypical scholar, in a sense, in one sense, would be someone at 4th level mature, because mature is the 4th soul age, and the 4th level would also be that. And yet, it's kind of a paradox, because we tend to think of scholars stereotypically as being rather dry and unemotional, like the academic who's just in their head and just taking notes. But if you see that number 4 is having to do with deep assimilation, then it fits very well with the mature cycle. And even at 3rd mature, you're doing a lot of assimilating as part of your lessons. And in your case, you're assimilating emotions that you may just not have as a soul decided to deal with in a lot of past lives. You might have really not been very emotional or very engaged with emotions because you were more comfortable with just facts. So now you want to know the meaning of things, you want to feel into things. It's a time of uh, firing on all cylinders. You want to be able to assimilate emotionally. You want to be able to feel fully, because after a while, if you're just in your head all the time, it doesn't feel that great. So it's a time of finding balance. One of the great things about living in 2024 is that we have so many tools now that are easily accessed if you know where to look, for healing emotionally, for going deeper into self, for getting into balance, that in my parents' generation really just didn't have. They would maybe go to a Freudian analyst, which would keep them stuck in their heads. And if they got any healing at all from that, it was a very slow process. But now there are so many ways to go deep quickly and to heal quickly. So it's marvelous if people are willing to do the work, willing to face their shadows. There are a lot of great tools for that we've never had before.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's good to know about all that. One of the things that I noticed for myself and for a lot of people that are in like the mature level 3, especially, it seems like music is like a super powerful, like healing experience. Like I've noticed for me, me being engaged in music, making music, I've been able to channel and express some like deep, heavy emotional stuff that comes through this. I have this band called Holy Tears. It's an instrumental rock band, and it's all like very heavy emotional, like rock music. But it resonates with my feelings and expresses things in a way that I can't express in words necessarily. So it's really interesting. But yeah, I'm curious to hear how that relates to, why mature soul age is connected to art and music and creativity, and why that is like a significant aspect of stepping into the mature soul age.
You might say that infant, baby, and young soul ages go increasingly into the outer world. So it culminates maybe at 4th level young, the sort of the pinnacle of the mountain of, okay, I understand how to deal with the world, and then I'm going to maybe expand this at 5th level and pay back karma about it at 6th level, and at 7th level, maybe teach it. And then feeling complete with the outer world focus, then it begins with an inner world focus, which is mature and old. And the way I like to say it is that mature soul goes as deep as possible, and the old soul goes as high as possible. So going deep into self, going deep into community, into relationships, into emotions, and so forth. And then once the inner world feels available and handled pretty well, then in the old soul cycle, the soul is trying to increasingly float above it all and saying, okay, there's me and you, which we focused on in the mature cycle, but there's also this larger context. How do you and I fit with the larger and larger universe? And so we're getting more and more philosophical about it. The fifth soul age is the old soul age, and five is the sage level, and sages seek wisdom. So it all fits together in kind of this elegant way. So we find the greatest flowering of the arts in the mature cycle, and a lot of the greatest artists were mature souls, because the soul is most benefited by going deeply into self, and as you shared with us, going deeply into music and art, and that is a great way to explore those feelings. And to when you make art, if you express your deepest emotions by writing a great poem or a song, you actually feel evolved. You feel like, wow, now I understand that better, because you created something out of that. And sometimes there's so much agony in doing this when it's something new and difficult for you, that the only way you can deal with it is to create art out of it, to make it beautiful where it had just been painful. So you have a lot of people writing hit songs about their breakup from their partner.
Yeah, that's a common one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they probably feel better. They feel like they've processed it by writing a
Mm.
song about it.
Yeah, it's very cathartic. It's and very healing to do that. It seems like one of the best ways to get through the difficult emotions and heal is to actually express it and create something out of it. Definitely. I'm really curious about what you have to say about like how somebody can really identify somebody who's in the mature versus old soul age. Like what are some like ways that we can really like see that very clearly for somebody who's mature versus old, and what the difference in terms of what they're focusing on is. You talked a little bit about that, but what I'm trying to get at is like how you can really clearly identify somebody who's dealing with mature soul issues versus somebody who's on the old soul stage.
Also, someone can be at one soul age internally, but be manifesting at a lower soul age because they're reviewing it, or they're young,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. It's not so easy to identify someone's true soul age without channeling it. And
Mm.
people tend to fall back on stereotypes. And unfortunately, if someone enjoys the finer things in life, they're immediately dismissed in the Michael teachings community as being a young soul. But there could be mature souls who also, like having money. I don't really know of anyone who doesn't like having more money than. Um, so you can't go on those superficial things. You have
Right.
to go deeper. But the old soul tends to be more detached and more philosophical about things, and they have an airier quality about them. And the mature soul tends to feel like they're more in the intensity or drama of things. Now, for example, artisans and priests are high frequency roles, so they could feel airy and light, but still actually be in the mature cycle. And
Mm.
so then you would look more for the intensity and the deep feelings, and the relationship focus being especially strong at that level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that I've noticed about like my old soul friends is like they might not be as like motivated to like do like have big projects in the world and stuff. They're more like, I kind of did that stuff already. Like it's like they have an innate like feeling like I don't really need to go prove myself or do anything big. It's like I'll just chill, have a good time, enjoy myself, and do whatever I want. It's kind of like the attitudes they seem to have sometimes, and they do seem to be more detached from the intensity of relationships, which seems to be like a big thing that mature souls are really like. What I notice for people who are in mature soul age is like they usually have like intense like a relationship issues, or like they're learning like intense lessons about relationships. Would you say that's true?
Very often, and again, I avoid generalizing too much because
Yeah.
everyone's a complicated individual with many factors at play.
Yeah.
So if you're a scholar, you're already kind of detached, being
Right.
neutral on the assimilation axis. So you're not going to look as intense as, say, a mature priest might look.
Yeah.
And it also depends on the other traits, the other overleaves, even the astrology, the way you were brought up. If if you're a mature priest in passion mode, it doesn't get any more intense than that usually.
Mm.
But let's say you are that, but you were brought up in a repressive, stiff upper lip kind of household where you're not supposed to express your emotions. So you might not so easily see that in that person because of those other mitigating factors there. But the young soul is the most willing, in general, to work really hard and do things they don't particularly enjoy, because the payoff at that cycle is to feel the success that, okay, I really needed to know that I could handle the world. So you have these people who might be setting their alarm for 6 a.m. and going into the corporate job and the long commute and working really hard. And if they talk frankly to you, they might tell you that they don't really love it, but they feel compelled to do it because they're learning something that's of value. And then the mature soul might feel more compelled, like to finish their artistic masterpiece or the novel. And the old soul is more likely to not do something unless they're really passionate about it, unless it feels like their mission, it feels like this is the realization of what I came here to do. And if it's not that, in the negative pole, the old soul can be lazy. And that's kind of the stereotype of the old soul, is the lazy old soul. But I know I'm not a lazy person. I really want to be productive. I want to get a lot done. But boy, I cannot make myself do things I hate doing. So it's really impossible for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, something I noticed about studying different people with the old soul age is they might tend to be like not so motivated about like their the day job kind of thing. They'll be like, I'll just depend on my unemployment
Yeah, right. Yeah.
and I'll just like I'll focus on what I really care about. Like they have like their projects or something that they're really passionate about, but for their day job or whatever, they're just like, I don't really care. But then, like, if they really do pay attention to their passion projects, that becomes like a big important thing. That maybe they'll be a writer, or they'll have be a
Yeah.
teacher in some
Right.
form of something, and that's where they find success. But yeah, that's what I've noticed is they're just like, don't care so much. It's interesting.
Yeah, and
Um,
the baby souls will be more about following the rules. This is what you're
mm,
supposed to do. So they could be really content, working the same job for 40 years and getting their gold watch and retiring and just going about things, because they're not generally that introspective at that level, and
mm,
they maybe don't even really expect that much of life, but their community is really important. So if their community is their church, for example, then
uh-huh.
being involved in the social activities of the church and going to services could be very satisfying for them. So what works for one person doesn't work for another person, and yet we tend to look at other people as if they were just like us, except inferior. And so, uh, well, this works for me. Why doesn't that work for you?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what's so interesting about the Michael teachings is it gets to highlight all these differences that we all have, and how
Yes,
it gets us to like really appreciate that people are approaching life in different ways. It's not all the same for everybody.
that's
It's
right. Yeah.
so important to know that, like I don't think it's taught enough, like highlighted enough that we have different purposes and we're learning different things at different times, and everybody's on their own journey, and I think that's really important to recognize.
Yeah, there's no better or worse than the Michael teachings. There's just the knowledge that if we're more in the positive side of our energies, we're going to be happier.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, there was something else I wanted to talk about that I've been exploring with my partner Cora recently. Is talking about the male and female energy, because we identify we both have we're more female energy leading. So I'm like 59, I'm 41, 59, 59 female, 41 male, and she's like 36, 64, something like that. So we're both on the feminine energy side, And I was really curious to hear from what you would say about that, like in terms of what the difference there is between somebody who has high male energy versus high female. Because what I noticed for a lot of charts that I've gotten was, for some reason, the people that I want to study are all super high male energy, which is interesting. But there's some interesting people, like the one chart that really jumped out to me was Eckhart Tolle. He's got like 74% female energy, which is really interesting, but really fits for his like kind of spiritual focus on going with the flow, being present, the kind of thing. But I wanted to hear from you, like what the main differences there in terms of what someone's experience is of having male energy leading versus female energy leading, what the dynamic is there.
We define male and female energy in a more narrow way in the Michael teachings than most people do. There are a lot of things that, in general, read masculine or read feminine
Mm-hmm.
to society. Uh, One of the things that reads masculine are the roles of warrior, king, and scholar,
Okay.
as they're the single input roles. They're more simple, and male energy is more simple because it's that linear kind of, you just moving toward the goal.
Right.
Female energy is complex because it's in all directions at once. So female energy, as we define it here, is like the light that comes from an incandescent bulb and fills the room. And male energy is like the light from a laser beam that just goes in a straight line toward a particular goal.
Mm.
So uh, on the Michael chart, male energy is goal oriented. And so your percentage of male energy suggests how much of your soul is dedicated toward putting itself out into the outer world to shape the outer world. And the female energy tells how much is more uh, about the inner world. So if you are a warrior and you're a woman, you're going to read more masculine because warriors are all about doing, and doing is also kind of a male energy trait because it's about the outer world.
Mm-hmm.
But you can be higher in female energy and be in a female body and be a warrior, and you'll still read kind of masculine in a way, the way society thinks of that. Same with kings and scholars. So you think of the in the movies, the old movies particularly, where the woman wearing glasses and who was really bookish, she wasn't considered to be the femme fatale or to be that feminine. And then sometimes there'll be the trope where she takes her glasses off and shakes her hair out, and suddenly she's this, luscious, very feminine woman, but not really. I mean, she's still bookish, she's still more intellectual. So we think of the softer energies as being more feminine because female energy is softer. So we think of the roles of artisan and server as being especially feminine. But again, they could be higher in male energy. You can be a man who's an artisan with high male energy, and you can still read kind of softer because you are a creative person and you're affectionate and adorable and playful and you like to work with your hands and that sort of thing. So, in the Michael teachings, your male female energy only refers to that aspect of masculine and feminine that has to deal with outer world versus inner world. Or do you tend to direct your energy in one direction, or you tend to do a lot of things? People with higher female energy may be just as busy or active, but they're maybe not as career oriented. So we typically find that people with high male energy, whether they're in a male body or a female body, tend to value their career because that's like they can put their energy in that one place and then they can be a workaholic. Whereas, let's say the high female energy person might do 10 things in a day, like they pick up the cleaning, go grocery shopping, and clean the house. So they can be very active in the world, but it's not focused on the goal. Now, the higher the male energy, the more likely you prefer the male body as a soul, although that is an individual preference. And the higher the female energy, the more likely you prefer the female body. But it's just one factor. If you're a warrior, king, or scholar, you also probably tilt more toward the male body because historically, the warriors, kings, and scholars have been allowed to do things in male bodies and not allowed to do things in female bodies that
Mm,
warriors, kings, and scholars like to do. Like, so for example, let's say you're a warrior, you go into female body and you want to enlist in the military.
yeah.
That was not allowed throughout most of history. That was
Mm,
always going to be the men. So the warriors who wanted to do that, or wanted to be in law enforcement, or wanted to be in business, which are favorites of the warrior, would probably come into the male body. But today, those things are more open to women. And
mhm,
so you're finding a lot of those warriors coming in as women now. And the people who are fighting hardest for equal rights for women are often these souls who have mostly been in male bodies, and now they're in female bodies, and they're saying, what is this bullshit that I don't get equal pay for my work? Get out of my way. I'm going to change that. And it's the ones who are used to that because they've been females so often that maybe it doesn't even cross their mind to be fighting for equal pay or whatever.
yeah. I've heard a little bit about that. Like just the our current times that it's kind of switching the roles. Like the warriors are incarnating in female bodies, and the artisans and servers are in male bodies. Like it's like to balance out things because we're in a different period in time where more is available to women to explore things, and potentially that is like to have have a new level of growth in ways that wasn't possible before, right?
Yeah, and if you have too many lifetimes in a row as one sex, you're going to get out of balance.
Mm,
So my father, who's deceased now, but he was a king soul with high male energy, a warrior secondary, very, very male.
yeah.
And um, he's been male in a lot of his lifetimes. And I'm thinking the next time he comes in as a woman, he is really going to be suffering. Like, he's going to go, what is this thing? I don't know how this works. And he may have a really unpleasant lifetime. No doubt he would be a lesbian woman and a very butch one, and would still be having sex with women just like he did in a male body, um, and would gradually maybe get to learn something more about the feminine. But then when he comes back into a male body, it's going to make him a better lover and partner to women, because as a husband, he really did not understand women at all. And he
Mm,
didn't understand emotions. He was also second mature, so he hadn't really done that deep dive into the emotional realm.
yeah,
So it can be hard if you just do one thing for too long, and we do need that balance.
right. That's so fascinating. People will be really interested to hear about all that and how that works with the Michael teaching stuff. Yeah, we're getting close to the end here. So there was actually something I was going to ask you at the beginning that we didn't get around to. Um, but I was curious about when we're talking about the channeling and just the Michael teachings in general. It's like this system is so, I feel it's so useful, but it's just like people don't know about it for some reason. It hasn't really caught on, and I'm thinking it's because of this channeling nature of it. That a lot of that's coming through channeling, and people probably feel weird about channeling for some reason. And I wanted to, you mentioned a little bit about how we actually do channel. It's very common that people are channeling, like anybody could possibly channel to a certain level, like when they're engaging in their creativity or their writing or whatever they're doing. Um, so I was just curious what you have to say about why maybe the Michael teachings isn't as popular as it is, and what perspective could we adopt maybe regarding how we view channeling or other things regarding Michael teachings that would allow us to support and really use this information and knowledge, because I feel like it's so useful, but for some reason there's some issues there, and I just wanted to hear your opinions on that.
The first Michael book came out in the late 70s. It was by an author named Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough, who's actually far more known for writing horror and vampire fiction. The first main Michael channel, Sarah Chambers, decided she didn't want to write the Michael book herself, and sold the rights to her first material to um, Quinn Yarbrough. And The first book was called Messages from Michael, and the mass market paperback had kind of a garish cover with a Ouija board on it, and it was rather sensationalistic, but it sold well. So there were a lot of people who got turned on to the Michael teachings, and I don't know what the numbers are, but the second book also sold well, More Messages from Michael, in mass market paperback form. But I think people read it and said, this is very interesting, but this depicts a private group that there's no way for me to contact. And if I can't find a channel to tell me what my roll and overleaves are, what use is it to me? So a lot of people just put it aside. They maybe always thought it was interesting, but it was the access to the channeling. Well, then other Michael channels, including me, started popping up all over, maybe having read that book or other books that started coming after that. And so there are a few other Michael channels scattered around. And, I hope that more accurate channels do become available for more and more people to be able to have access to this information. If you just read the books, and you don't really get a tutorial on what these traits look and feel like in the real world, it's easy to jump to faulty conclusions about what you or someone else is. So, like, oh, I must be a warrior because I work really hard, or I must be a scholar because I love to read, or I must be a server because, I'm a woman and I've been taking care of my parents for the last 30 years. And really, these energies go much deeper than those kind of superficial behaviors, and you can't jump to conclusions too much based on that. So, just from reading books, people tend to get it wrong. But it is possible to learn this material so well that you do become accurate at picking out the traits that you're looking at, or at least in the ballpark. So, this is one of the things that I'm promoting. I do workshops now over Zoom. Uh, Starting in January, I'm doing one called The Journey of Your Soul, where we're going over people's charts and I'm teaching you how to discern what these things actually look and feel like in the real world, and to really learn the teachings well, so you don't have to always have it be channeled in order to get a good handle on what you're dealing with in a particular person.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, yeah, I've been like trying to figure out a way to make this accessible for people who just who are not familiar with the channeling aspect. So I made some tests that people can
Oh,
take for
right.
different
Yeah.
things. So that's one thing I was trying to do to make it more accessible. But I do feel like, I mean, the charts that you've been doing has been so helpful. It's so awesome. So I really want to encourage people to check out your site. If it's okay with you, I was going to show your website real quick on
Yes.
the screen. Let me
It's
do
my
that.
shepherdhoodwin.com.
Yeah, let me get that going right here. Is it showing it right now?
Yes, I see it.
Yeah, so ShepherdHoodwin.com, shepherdhoodwin.com. So this is your website. If people want to order a chart, this is where I usually go. You go into your order page, and then you're going to fill out this information and then select Michael reading chart. This is where you fill out the information and submit a photo and your name. And that's pretty much the main things you go off, right? Yeah. So this is if you want to get your own chart channel, this is where you go on Shepherd's website. Go to the order page and then select Michael's reading chart. So and then we'll just show the books real quick too, so people can see the different books you've got going on here. Journey of Your Soul is the main one for the Michael teachings, introduction stuff. You talk about many different subjects on Michael teachings in that one. And then a lot of these other ones are like short, easy reads about different aspects of the Michael teachings, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that's your website. And yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much for spending time with me to talk about some Michael teaching stuff.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's been awesome. There's so much to talk about in the system. I've been posting a lot of videos talking about different things, trying to make this more accessible to people on the web through YouTube mainly. But I want to thank you so much for all the work you've done over the years, channeling all these charts for me. I've got a good database of charts and stuff that I've been sharing with people online and stuff, and getting to know my family has been really, and my friends has been really awesome. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, if you guys like this content, please like and subscribe and check out Shepherd's website. You can get your chart channeled, and that's it. I'll see you guys in the next one.